Hi friends, thanks to the Space Marine game, I have ascended to full Games Workshopness and have recently been on a bit of an Ultramarine kick. Additionally, one of the factions that hasn't got much love on the channel yet are the Tyranids. So what better event to talk about than the Imperium's first encounter with the Nids, the First Tyrannic War. So before kicking this off, I should mention the first actual encounter with the Tyranids was on the moons of Yumgarl, where some Imperials saw the tentacle-faced Gene Stealers. However, these Xenos were not recognized as Tyranids at the time, and they were quickly purged by the Salamanders. The first encounter with the Tyranids where they were properly identified was when an Imperial explorer fleet led by Magos Veranak was doing a planetary census around Tyran. Tyran is an oceanic world in the Ultima Segmentum, which is the same segmentum as Ultramar, if you couldn't tell from the name. And Ultramar is where the Ultramarines are from, if you couldn't tell from the name. Now, Tyran was a relatively unimportant world, but it was notable for having some heavily armed fortresses, since the local Imperials would regularly be attacked by the dangerous sea monsters of the world. Which, also, I just want to say, before I even learned of Tyran, I made my homebrew regiment's home planet to have basically the same sea monster shtick, and I thought I wrote something super cool and unique, it's never been done before, just to later read about this stupid planet that was pretty much exactly the same as mine. Ugh! But back to the planetary census. The explorers carrying out the census had found the once thriving worlds around Tyran were now completely devoid of life, even down to the microscopic level. The dead plants were reported, but due to the area's relative unimportance, it was ignored. And I thought these plants were Imperial, not Dark Elder, am I right, boys? Although Tyran was treated like the Votan range and didn't get much support, it had a particularly formidable fortress on one of its islands, and the planetary governors and explorer team were able to bolster a pretty well mounted defense. This fortress, called Tyran Primus, had four huge orbital defense lasers along with a crapload of autocannons and las cannon point defense turrets. In addition to the guns, the fortress had a ground force composed of Skitarii warriors and a regiment of veteran Catachan jungle fighters. So, pretty badass stuff. But the Tyranians were about to wish they had the Catachan's cousin regiment, the Krapatan Bug Fighters, because they weren't fighting no jungle, they were fighting the gosh darn Tyranids. So then the invasion finally kicked off with the Tyranids launching a bunch of bioships, only for them to get blasted by the lasers. After about an hour of constant lasing and bioshipping, the fleet fell back. With the bulk of the enemy fleet seemingly shredded by the planet's defenses, Mangos Veranak led a splinter fleet to pursue the retreating bioships and kill the rest of them. However, Veranak was very mistaken. He found out that the ships that the lasers had destroyed were a mere fraction of the actual fleet. The fleet that he initially thought to be made up of a few dozen bioships was actually made up of thousands of bioships. Turns out the Tyranid scouting force did a little Tom and Jerry maneuver to lure the Imperial pursuit fleet to their much bigger and badder buddies, and once meeting the bulk of the Tyranid fleet, the Imperials were swiftly destroyed and the Tyranids launched their full assault on Tyran. The Nid fleet shot thousands of mycetic spores, which are basically Tyranid drop pods, onto the oceans around the Imperial fortress, and millions of Nids closed in on the island. The Imperials fought hard and unleashed unending volleys of blast fire, but unfortunately for them, the Tyranids were even more unending and were getting ever closer to breaking the Imperial fortress's defenses. Even worse for the Imperials, the Tyranids had something called the Shadow and the Warp. This is an ability that the Tyranids have to block psychic connections to surrounding beings. This can even affect regular people, as almost everybody has a warp signature, so it usually gives most people at least feelings of uneasiness. As if seeing a million knife-wielding dinosaur bugs didn't already make you feel uneasy. But even more important than making the Imperials poop their pants is that the Shadow of the War prevented the planet's astropaths from calling in reinforcements, so the dwindling guard force was all there would ever be to defend the planet. Said dwindling guard force dwindled even more when the orbital defenses were overrun and even more mycetic spores dropped planetside. Soon after, the Tyranids completely overtook the fortress and killed everyone. After killing all the Imperials, the Tyranids completely consumed all of the biomass on Tyran and sucked the oceans completely dry, proving that the Tyranids still use Snapchats as they're the thirstiest motherfuckers on the block. About a year later, Inquisitor Cryptman, yes, the same one who would go on to make the ill-fated Octarius Gambit, would come across a dead world and find a message left by Vagos Veranak talking about how hopeless it is to fight the Tyranids and warning the greater Imperium of the existential threat that these funky bug dudes posed. Cryptman dubbed this new Xenos menace as the Tyranids, since, they're first ID'd on Tyran. Now, what should I call this new alien bugs? Well, I did ID them on the planet of Tyran. Tyran ID. Oh, I know. ID Tyrans. Oh, wait, no. Tyranids, yes! This particular Tyranid force was named Hive Fleet Behemoth, and it ravaged every planet in its way, leaving a wake of dead worlds. As the onslaught continued, Cryptman continued to study them, and he relayed his information to the Ultramarines chapter master, Marneus Calgar. Using Cryptman's research, Calgar and the forces of Ultramar fortified Macragge and prepared for a final stand in order to stop Behemoth dead in its deadly tracks. Macragge would serve as an important defensive position as it was the Imperium's only real chance to stop the fleet. If Macragge fell, the planet's passive would not be reasonably equipped to stop such a threat, and the Ultima Sector, as well as the Imperium as a whole, would be in great danger. Calgar gathered every single spaceship he possibly could in order to create a defensive line across Macragge's orbit. In addition to the Void Forces, Calgar heavily reinforced Macragge's polar fortresses with Marines and the Ultramar Auxilia. And soon it would be on like Donkey Kong, brother, when the Tyranids kicked off the party. The Hive began by sending in suicidal waves of bioships that would make a Krieger blush through his mask. Even though the defensive line was destroying most of the incoming ships, some would trickle through and mycetic spores would make their way to the surface. On the planet's surface, Calgar led his ground forces. He divided his army into three groups. Two of the groups, which were primarily made up of veterans of the First Company, hunkered down and defended the two polar fortresses. The third group was personally led by Calgar and was made up of the entire Second Company, along with various other Ultramarine companies. This third and final force was the largest, and its purpose was to flank the Tyranids in order to aid the polar defenders. Although Calgar was a masterful tactician and had effective strategies, the Imperials were still losing ground to the Tyranids. Due to the heavy losses, Calgar was forced to fall back further north, which left an important starport to get overrun by gene stealers. This crippled Macragge's fleet and inflicted heavy losses on the Ultramar Auxilia. Higher up north, the Ultramarines met up with the large company of Auxilia and set up heavy fortifications at the Cold Steel Ridge Industrial Complex. The Auxilia force was formidable and even had possession of a Baneblade super heavy battle tank, which would be invaluable in the upcoming defense. But things were only going to get worse for the Blue Besties. It often gets overlooked since Tyranids are often perceived as mindless beasts, but the hive mind is actually a highly intelligent being, and its constantly adapting nature proved hard to overcome, even for the Ultramarines chapter master. The hive mind analyzed its prey and decided that Calgar was one of the most pressing threats in the war. To deal with Big Blue, it sent in a Swarmlord to kill him. Swarmlords are some of the deadliest Tyranid organisms, if not the deadliest. Swarmlords have the most autonomy of all the Tyranid units, and they specialize in strategizing. They're master tacticians, and they lead the lesser Tyranid organisms when simple tactics won't suffice. From this, you might think there's some kind of big brain nerd unit who only works out in the library, but Swarmlords are no slouches in a fight. They're most commonly equipped with their deadly boners, I mean bone sabers, and they can cut through adamantium and force fields like they're butter. With their extreme speed and reflexes, they fight with relentless fury, and very few opponents can even land a hit on them. With their forearms, speed, and overwhelming fighting style, I like to imagine them as fleshy, buggy, ginormous versions of the 2003 Clone Wars General Grievous. If that doesn't show you how scary these guys are, either the Clone Wars 2008 series polluted your mind too much with Grievous being a lame-o escape artist, or I'm too old and no one cares about 2003 Clone Wars anymore. Additionally, if they do happen to get killed, which actually happens a lot as they're one of the setting's favorite punching bags, they could be reborn from the hive mind with all their memories and experiences intact. This allows the hive mind to spawn deadly swarmlords with centuries of experience and knowledge. But anyways, back to the battle. Now that the Tyranids had a big dude to strategize for them, things went south for the Marines who went north. One of the first strategies implemented by the Swarm Lord was sending in Raveners to burrow underground and flank the Marines. The Marines responded to the sudden assault, but they foolishly overextended, leaving their Baneblade unsupported. While the Imperials focused down on the Raveners, Carnifexes tore the unsupported Baneblade to shreds. Seeing that the Tyranids were using actual tactics that weren't just, more bug than bullet, durr. That made Calgar shit in his ultra toilet, and he realized that things were no longer a circus, they were for serious. Two master strategists went head to head. Calgar and the Swarmlord had a battle of the brains as they both played 40k chess with each other, and this battle of the brains eventually culminated in a battle of the brawn when Calgar decided to fall back once more. But the Swarmlord was having none of this retreat nonsense, and it and its tyrant guards rushed in to engage Calgar and his honor guards in an epic battle. Fist met blade, blade met blue, blue met red. It was a mixer, and the only guests were these hands. The wounded Calgar put up a good fight, but was eventually overwhelmed by the vicious Swarmlord. As the Swarmlord prepared its killing blow, Calgar's honor guard shielded the chapter master and sacrificed themselves to evacuate their boss. Calgar and the Ultramarines boarded Thunderhawk gunships and they once again fell back. Or should I say they fell up because they went to the orbital battle barge of Octavius. Without Calgar, the Cold Steel Ridge was lost to the Tyranids. That was the last line of defense before the North Pole Fortress and the remaining Marines and Santa Claus prepared their two final strongholds at the poles. In orbit, Calgar recovered and assumed control of the remainder of the Imperial fleet. The Tyranid fleet fell back, attempting to get Calgar away from Macragge and lure him into a trap. But Calgar had also planned a trap. Both sides had a trap laid on the nearby ringed planet of Circe. Just like in those boomerangs, there was something deadly hiding behind the rings. A Tyranid fleet emerged from the planet's rings to destroy Calgar's fleet. However, the blue boss pulled an Uno reverse card and his reinforcing Tempestus fleet arrived just in time to pincer the Tyranid forces. Of the fleet was the ancient and formidable Emperor-class battleship Dominus Astra. The Emperor-class battleships are some of the largest Imperial starships ever made and are ancient war machines. These ships are invaluable due to their firepower, size, and the fact that the Imperium doesn't know how to make them anymore, so they are a finite asset. Even with the Tempestus fleet, Calgar's forces were woefully outnumbered. Though the Imperial Navy fought valiantly, it seemed like they would be once again outmatched. That is until the Dominus Astra came in with the steel chair. The massive battleship flew straight into the center of the Tyranid fleet and it overloaded its warp drives. This caused a massive warp vortex that transported nearly the entire Tyranid force into the warp along with the ancient battleship. Which, come to think about, is kind of like a mini version of what Abaddon did on Cadia. But since I like the Imperium, I'm just going to frame this as a heroic sacrifice and not a whiny, if I can't have it, nobody can moment. Like, get wrecked, heretic scum, am I right, boys? Even though the fleet was destroyed, the Behemoth forces on Macragge still posed a massive threat. Captain Saul Invictus of the First Company led the defenses in Calgar's absence, and the First Company, along with the Titan legions, defended the northern ice fields. Both the South and North defense forces were faltering and likely would have been overwhelmed if not for Calgar's army returning just in time. In the South, there were few survivors, but with the help of a free blade and the reinforcing Ultramarines, they purged the remaining tyranids in the underground tunnels of the fortress. Up in the north, things were a bit more dire, but with the combined might of Thunderhawk ordnance, Devastator squads, and some dreadnoughts, the Ultramarines assaulted the undergrounds just like their brothers did in the South Pole. After much fighting, they got to the final room of the fortress where they found thousands of Tyranids dead at the feet of the final Terminator squad of the First Company. These Terminators brought down a small army before perishing. The entirety of the Ultramarines' First Company had sacrificed themselves defending their home planet. Despite massive losses, the Ultramarines had successfully defended their home and halted Behemoth's warpath. In the following years, the Imperials worked hard to kill all of the remaining Tyranids. They were aided by the Blood Angels and Terminex in their extermination efforts. It took the Marines decades to return to full strength, but they had learned valuable lessons about the galaxy's newest threat. From the ashes of the chapter, Chaplain Cassius assembled an elite unit of Ultramarines dubbed the Tyrannic War Veterans. These Marines experienced the bug baddies firsthand, and they trained in tactics to combat them. They regularly battle Hive fleets, and they aid their Imperial brethren across the galaxy. As for the Tyranids, although Hive Fleet Behemoth was seemingly annihilated, the Swarmlord's body was never found, and the Behemoth forces scattered in order to gather biomass and regrow their numbers. These splinter fleets were encountered on nearby worlds and continued to be significant threats. One notable attack was led by one of the few named Tyranids, Old One-Eye. The aptly named One-Eye Carnifex was sighted assaulting the world of Kalth. Although on paper this was an Imperial victory, I wouldn't really say it was a Tyranid loss. They may have lost the Battle of Macragge, but before that happened, they completely killed many Imperial worlds, severely crippled the Ultramarines, and they gained valuable knowledge on the Imperium. Like previously stated, the Hive Mind is constantly adapting and creating strategies to counter its opponent. So this war strengthened the Hive Mind more than it damaged it. But that's all I've got for today. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. The Tyranids are an awesome faction and they pose a major threat to the 40k universe. Also, the Ultramarines, they're usually hated on, but I'm just gonna say it. The Ultramarines are cool, gosh darn it. Roman-themed super soldiers are super cool. Like, just look at these dudes and tell me they aren't some of the coolest things you've ever done seen. Also, aesthetically, I love how the colors of the Ultramarines look fighting against the colors of Behemoth in art. The blue and the red, ooh, it's just so nice. Also, the channel recently hit 40k. I have now collected the 40,000 Warhammers and I can begin my ascension to a true 40k YouTuber. Thank you everyone for supporting the channel. It has been tremendous. And thank you to the Patreons who support the channel a bit more. I appreciate all of you even more than GW appreciates the Ultramarines. As always, please like, comment, subscribe, and consider sharing to all your blue and red Space Marines and /or dinosaur bug monster things. Thanks. I could probably go on an hour-long rant about how good Behemoth looks against the Ultramarines. Like, Leviathan is cool and all, but they just don't pop against the Blueberries quite enough for me.